Hi, I'm Adrienne Terizzi. Welcome to Amherst Neighbor to Neighbor. With us today in the Amherst Media Studios is the multifaceted Max Page. Welcome, Max.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Max, you live a life full of activity. Scholar, professor and graduate program director at UMass, author of several books, two of which were recently released, recipient of a Guggenheim and a Fulbright, an accomplished photographer with an exhibit currently in Herder Gallery at UMass. You certainly have a long history of activity in social justice and political issues. You rally in solidarity with Wisconsin. You've served as past president of the Massachusetts Society of Professors, the MSP. You are currently on the executive committee of Phenom, the Public Higher Education Network in Massachusetts, and you've served on town committees. You're a husband, and you're a father of three. Where should we start?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm also a lifelong, I grew up in Amherst. That's what's remarkable, that I ended up back here after all these years and activities.
Born and raised.
That's right.
Born and raised in Amherst. What are some of your memories about growing up in Amherst?
Oh boy, it was a great place to grow up. I actually, even at the moment when I said, I've got to get out of this small town, and graduated from high school, I remember thinking this would be a great place to come back to and live with some future family that I have. And lo and behold, about 15 years later, by chance, I ended up back here.
Back you came.
Yeah.
And we'll get to why you returned to Amherst, but your parents are Alex and Anita Page.
That's right.
So you've got educated parents, and
right.
Anita certainly served as a principal of an elementary school in South Hadley, and your father, longtime professor of English at UMass.
Right.
I think he still beats you at chess, however.
That's true. 87 going on 88, and he still beats me.
He still beats you at chess.
Only difference is now I don't mind so much.
Being raised in an academic community, was your career trajectory clear to you? Were you influenced because of your upbringing here?
I mean, I was influenced to love public education for one thing, since my mother worked as a principal in a public school. My father taught at UMass as a public institution. But I never thought I would become a professor, not until really late in college, when I just fell in love with the study of history. And even then I went and moved on to New York and thought I would work in public policy and maybe law. But I had this desire to study more and to write. I feel like I backed into a PhD and then deciding that I wanted to have this kind of life.
Well, when you left Amherst, Max, where did you head for your education?
Well, I sort of have headed down Route 91 and 95. I went to Yale University for undergraduate, and then graduated in 1988 and went to New York. And I did something called the Urban Fellows Program, which was, it's for young people to be recruited to work in New York City government. And so I was really interested and focused on the issue of housing and homelessness. And so I worked in the homeless shelter division of the New York City government for a couple of years.
Well, that was the late 80s. That's very interesting because many of your friends in New York City went off to banking.
Yeah.
And many young people graduating in that era were going off into the financial sectors, but you went to the city shelters.
Yeah.
And
well, it was interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because I felt like that was a real education, because this was the era when New York was coming back and booming, and indeed many of my friends were working in these growing sectors, whether it's consulting or banking and the like, and yet I ended up in this other part and seeing the whole underside of New York, where there was still enormous and deep poverty that we being the New York City government at that time, sheltered over 50,000, actually I think it was closer to 60,000 people every night in city shelters and hotels and the like. So there was a deep undercurrent of poverty even amidst the appearance of a lot of wealth. And that really was it shouldn't have been shocking, I should have known that, but it really woke me up to that issue.
that followed your 4 years at Yale, Max, and Didn't you walk some picket lines during your years at Yale, and then coming into a city gravitating towards the needs of the homeless in New York City? Sort of a very grassroots feeling to both those early endeavors of yours.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, looking back, I realized there was a long-standing interest in these social justice efforts in my life and in support of unions, but I wouldn't have known it at the time. But yes, when I got to Yale, it was actually 3 weeks after I arrived, there was what turned out to be a semester-long strike of the dining hall workers there, which was then supported by the other unions on campus. So essentially, there was no dining hall service the entire semester, and it was a real education about unions and about, frankly, the inequities at this very wonderful but very wealthy college.
What was your major as an undergraduate at Yale?
I ended up in history, but I've kind of walked this line between history and architecture and the study of cities since early on. It was just a few key professors there that really fueled my passion in these areas.
I'd like to pursue that for a little bit, because the fact that you are a professor of art and art history and architecture, there's also an element of design too in the program up at UMass. The blending of all those areas. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, Max?
It's interesting because I have a PhD in history, but I've always walked between these two worlds. I've taught in 3 history departments, at UPenn, at Georgia State University, at Yale, and then now I'm in an architecture program. I'm the only non-designer in that program. So I love being in that setting, but I think I try to bring the historical and the theoretical background, foundation to those students.
Yale and then the University of Pennsylvania, private higher education institutions, and yet you are a vocal and a passionate supporter of public higher ed.
Yeah.
Your recent book on the future of higher ed, and certainly your work with Phenom, the public higher ed network in Massachusetts. Is there a disconnect there? Is there an influence there? Talk to us about that path from your own private education to passionate supporter of public higher ed.
It is very interesting. I almost went to UCLA before deciding on UPenn for graduate school. So there it just seemed like it was one or the other. I think I moved steadily after that time towards really being invested in public higher ed. I taught, as I mentioned, down at my first sort of tenure track job was at Georgia State University in Atlanta. And it really brought me back to the kind of mission that public institutions have, because at Georgia State we really had a much more lower income kids, a much more diverse, racially diverse population that went there. Lots of students who were the first ones in their families to go to college. So it brought back my memories of what UMass was all about when my father taught here. And so then when I had a chance to come back to UMass, I was thrilled.
Your book, The Future of Higher Ed, you talk about the crisis in public higher ed, and certainly the fact that we have skyrocketing tuitions for public higher ed, as well at the same time as insufficient funding for these institutions. What solutions are you reaching for, Max?
Well, one of the points of my work with Phenom, and then in writing this book with my co-author Dan Clausen, a friend and colleague at UMass, was to move beyond the very narrow, not narrow, but sort of limited solutions, like let's add another 1% to the budget, or let's try to add another $1 million for financial aid for students.
Or let's tax a service fee here and
Exactly. We wanted to say that we need a real fundamental switch, or a real sort of revolutionary change. And one of our biggest proposals is that public higher education should be free. And we all, I think probably viewers probably say, what? Well, actually, when I was in Georgia, teaching there, Georgia we think of as a more conservative place. They had, for those students who maintained a B average in high school and they went on to college at a public college and had B average, they got free tuition and fees and money for books.
I wasn't aware of
Yes,
that.
they have
in
something called the
Georgia.
Hope Scholarship. The city colleges in New York used to be totally free. And California Community
California,
College
New
were
York,
largely free.
yes,
So in other words,
yes.
it's part of our tradition, and it's part of the way the rest of the world thinks about public higher ed. So
Absolutely.
it's not that radical. It's radical for where we are now politically.
Do you think that will definitely occur in your lifetime, or
Listen, I mean, you know, obviously I would say it's not going to happen tomorrow, but everyone from the far right to the far left are saying that we need to educate our children beyond high school. Almost everyone agrees. You know, George Bush and Barack Obama would agree with that, and they both said those same things. I think we're at a point where we were 60 years ago when people said, well, everyone should have a high school education, and people said, no, that's too much. Not everyone needs it. Now we assume, of course, it should be free up through 12th grade. What's different about 13th grade? And we're all saying we need that 13th grade or 14th, but we're not willing to, as a society yet, to pay for it, make it affordable.
So the impetus for the book, was it a coming together of your work via the MSP or certainly Phenom? Because here you gear a little bit more, a little further from architecture and the history of architecture and neighborhoods, and we'll get to that, but the blend, so to speak, of your political and social activism, is that the impetus for future of higher ed?
They're different worlds for me, and in other words, my academic interests in the transformation of cities and historic preservation, I feel like they stem from a different kind of place. I mean, obviously, one of the things I love so much about cities and write about is their place of potential amazing mixing and democracy and creativity. And that's what I hope for public higher ed as well.
My hope too is, do you think there is a sustainable future if we were to continue on the way we think about public higher ed, skyrocketing fees, tuition, funding that's inadequate?
No, I mean, I think some of the worst things that are happening is that in response to the lack of funding, public universities are saying, well, we'll raise tuition and maybe we'll privatize certain functions, we'll let someone else teach, we'll privatize certain programs. I think we're going to have to address the one thing that pays for these things, which is taxes.
Taxes. Yeah. Currently in the House, isn't there a bill that you have helped propel through and bring attention to this very issue, Max? You want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's called the Act to Reinvest in Our Communities, and it's a bill, actually it's sponsored in both the House and the Senate, and our own Representative Ellen Story is a co-sponsor in the House. And there's a lot of people supporting it, and it would raise the income tax rate up to 5.95%.
Is that a raise, or is that back to where we were?
It's back to where it was, exactly.
Yeah,
it's
back to where we
bringing it back
were.
to where it was. The difference this time is we would raise the exemptions that people take. What that means is that people who are lower end of the economic scale, at the end of this tax bill, if it's passed, would actually pay no more, and they might even have a tax cut. The idea is to raise more revenues, but raise it from those who have benefited the most over the past 20 years. All the increase in incomes has been at the very top end of the scale.
Certainly has, and the millionaires and billionaires tend to increase in number, and the students and the middle class are. Well, this is a positive sign for some progressive tax changes. Other bills, or either in the House or the Senate, that either are in the pipeline, Max, or that are coming up that you know
well,
about?
Well, there's two that I could mention. Well, one is another tax bill. Actually, our state senator, Stan Rosenberg, has filed a bill that would essentially be a constitutional amendment to allow for a truly progressive income tax system. In Massachusetts, probably a lot of people know this, is that we can't have different rates for different income levels. We have to have one flat rate no matter whether you're a millionaire or make $20,000 a year. We have to change our constitution to allow that, and his bill would start that process. But that's a longer process, and frankly, it's had difficulty in the past. I'm hoping it'll be successful this time. And the other is Phenom, the Public Higher Education Network of Massachusetts, has filed a bill called the Finish Line Grants that would provide 1 year of free public college or university tuition and fees for any needy that is under, I think we put $100,000 family income student. So it provides it's 1/4 of the way towards free public higher ed.
And certainly would go a long way in helping move a system along to...
Exactly. And helping those students graduate with a little less debt. We have more student debt in this country than we do credit card debt.
And I was amazed at reading how much debt a student coming out of our public higher ed institutions are encumbered with. I think it was 12 to 20,000, perhaps a little bit more. Even more. Even more. Very important issues that you make us pay attention to, Max. Along the way, because of your broad interests, I said that you were multifaceted. I think that's certainly very accurate. Who have your professional mentors been, Max?
Professional mentors in both in all the different ways.
Yes, your many areas.
Yeah, you know, there's as we have this whole discussion about revitalizing education, we keep coming back to the teachers that matter. And I think about the teachers I had all the way from high school, the key teachers in college and graduate school that are so important. I could list some. Vincent Scully, the architectural historian at Yale, just inspired a love of cities and architecture and how important it is. Very different person was William Cronin, a historian of the American West and landscape historian who taught me about the love of the craft of doing history and doing research and writing and how important good writing is. On the political side, at UMass, I mean, my wife is a key mentor. Eve Weinbaum is the head of the Labor Center and has really taught me so much about union organizing and social justice movements. And my co-author, Dan Clausen, who was the former president of the Massachusetts Society of Professors just before me.
And also, he's at UMass, is he?
He's a professor of sociology at UMass and very active, a very big activist on a whole series of fronts.
Could do well for the book.
Yeah. That's it.
Speaking of Eve Weinbaum, your wife, you returned to Amherst after being absent for 15 years or so. Can you talk to us a little bit about what did bring you back to Amherst? Was that a planned return, something that was in the back of your mind, serendipity?
Yeah, it was in the back of my mind, but way in the back of my mind. I was living in Atlanta, and I was teaching at Georgia State University. And Eve was actually the political and education director for Unite, which is it's an amalgamation of the former textile unions, the Amalgamated Textile Workers Union and the Ladies Garment Workers Union. And she was organizing down throughout the South, and we met there. And then she got a job here in the Labor Center. And so, it was really up in the air. Would we stay in Atlanta? Would we come here? And we decided, to come back here. And eventually I was able to get a job at UMass.
You returned. I know that you've gone back and forth. Your parents still live in town. But after being away for those years, what architectural or other changes did you see in town?
It's interesting. It's interesting. I would say one of the things that was striking to me was the increase in wealth, at least visible. I'm sure I know there's another side. And bigger and bigger houses on formerly, it felt more agricultural. It felt smaller and more rural when I was growing up. And, you go down the streets that we know, you see, new developments happening there. And it's been a central issue. I wrote a paper back in high school about the issue of we need to build denser town centers. And that issue is still what we talk about today in town.
Quite interesting. You returned around 2000, 2001, or a little earlier, trying to put that in the perspective of those big houses that started going up. So in a sense, Eve's position as Labor Center Director at UMass, and you followed, and you eventually had 3 children. How old are they? And
my
tell
children,
us a little something
I've got,
about them.
Jonah, who is 11. All 3 are in Wildwood right at this moment. It's the last time they'll all be in the same school in Amherst. So Jonah is 11, and Aviva is 10, and Ruthie is 7.
Bundle of energy.
Yes, they are. They're great. They love it here. Ruthie and Aviva were just in the Missoula Children's Theater performance of Alice in Wonderland, and they do the chorus, the young people's chorus, which we love. And The older ones play violin and viola, and we're hoping to get a trio going.
You certainly have the right number there. Are they following sort of what you enjoyed as a student, or what Eve enjoyed as a student, or is that because of the opportunities here in Amherst?
That is, I feel like I'm the eternal issue of, as a parent, what do you guide them toward that you loved, and what do you let them discover? So actually, Jonas started piano, and then he decided he didn't want to do that. So now he does viola. So I think the encouragement about music and certain sports and things, like Aviva does gymnastics, and Eve used to do gymnastics, and Jonah is finally getting into ultimate frisbee, which I always loved growing up here in Amherst.
You're raising your children in Amherst, a different time, of course, and you raised here, but make some more comparisons in terms of your own youth and now your children.
You know, it's funny, there's so many things that are similar. I mean, literally, we walk out and go over to Community Field, which is what I did. And until it was closed, although I hope it reopens, we spent our summers at War Memorial Pool growing up, and my kids loved going there, getting their first lessons at War Memorial Pool. So there's a remarkable number of things that are very similar.
How does that feel when you are walking the same streets and paths, and now you're bringing your children along?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, as a historian, I love that feeling. You know, the little alleyway next to Antonio's. It was like such a memorable thing as a kid growing up, and now they love going up to that narrow little alley. So that's great. I don't know whether this is because it's more trafficky or just we're more fearful. I feel like I had much more. I went out biking right down the streets to visit friends at a much earlier age. Now we always say, well, they're not ready yet. We'll have to drive them there, or we'll have to, walk them over there, and so that seems different. And I'm not quite sure where that comes from.
I think I'd agree. More traffic, hence the greater number of traffic lights, even in town center, since you were born in town, and we allowed our children to ride all over, and those were the days without bike paths. So now we're thankful for the bike paths that allow us to reduce the number of automobiles on the streets. Other comparisons in terms of your children living in Amherst and your youth.
I'm not sure. It's funny. I was so much more aware of that I was returning to the town when I first got here. Now it feels like now it's my town, and now it's my town with my family, not just where I grew up. But.
Recently, I'd like to switch topics a little bit, Max. Recently, you and Eve and the family were in Argentina.
Yeah.
You spent a number of months there. Why Buenos Aires?
That's a good question. I'll tell you. One was I was invited to teach about United States historic preservation in Buenos Aires with a professor I had met. The other, though, is that one of my areas of interest is how societies remember and how they preserve sites of their history, especially the difficult sites related to the past. And so Buenos Aires and Argentina has had the era of the dirty war in the 1970s and 80s, when there was a dictatorship that was incredibly repressive and violent towards its own citizens. So the country has been in the midst of ongoing question about how do we remember those sites of torture and kidnapping? How do we memorialize those events? And so for my work here in the United States, I was really interested in exploring how they do that there.
And you also went with camera in hand.
Yes.
Because your photo exhibit, your artful photo exhibit that's now at Herder Hall, it's been going on all month. It does end on the 31st. Did you go down with intention of indeed capturing some of the aspects of the dirty war and bringing it to our visual memories?
Well, that's one of the beauties of the Fulbright Fellowship, is that because it's intent to have you be a cultural ambassador and to explore the country in which you're a fellow. I really felt freed up to actually take my camera, which I have long, old interest in. I used to do exhibits actually with another Amherst resident, an old friend of mine, Paul Maines Johansson, and we had done black and white photographs. So I really wanted to explore the city and these sites of related to the Dirty War through my camera. So when I came back, it was the gallery welcomed me to do an exhibit there.
And it's a wonderful exhibit.
No, thanks.
Our time always runs so short here, Max. But you mentioned your old friends, and I recall a tradition. Some old buddies of yours, now older buddies, enjoying Red Sox home openers. You going this year?
Well, I'm not going to go to the home opener.
Because you park in my daughter's driveway.
That's right. That's right.
Out towards Boston.
One of my oldest friends has just acquired season tickets, so I'm going to call in my old friend Chits to be able to go to a few of those.
Turn in your old Chits. Yes. Well, with the minutes remaining, I'd like to ask you the two questions,
Sure.
and as briefly as you possibly can, Max. What do you value here in Amherst?
I value here a group of thinking, talking a lot people who are committed to social justice. And I love that, to being around that, people who are committed to those things.
And what would you like to see here?
What would I like to see here? I would like to see us be kind of the model for the rest of the state about investing in our public life, in being willing to confront the difficult issues about density and traffic and energy efficiency, and really be a model for the rest of the state.
And we anticipate you being part of that dialogue. Thank you so much.
You're very
We've
welcome.
run to the end of our time. It's really good to have you with us today. And thank you for tuning in. We welcome your comments and your suggestions for future guests. So please let us hear from you. Do email us at community@actvamherst.com. And with thanks again to Max Page and to Wendy and Kayla and James and Craig and all the crew here at Amherst Neighbor to Neighbor. Bye for now, and we'll see you next week.